Have you ever had that sinking feeling that you weren't actually alone in a house, even when you were supposed to be? Welcome back to 3 true scary stories to keep you up at night, and hit that subscribe button if you're new here. If you're enjoying this story so far, go ahead and smash that like button for me. My friend Keith has an uncle who struggles with dementia. To make a long story short, his uncle usually lives with Keith's grandmother, but she was away in Florida with a church group for the week. Since Keith had to go on a business trip, he didn't want to leave his uncle by himself, so he hired me to house sit. This job included watching over and taking care of his uncle, who I'll call Uncle Nick. Keith was only going to be gone for 2 days, so I figured it would be an easy way to help out. On the first day of my stay, I mostly just relaxed in the backyard. I spent the afternoon reading a book and trying to get a tan, or just hanging out in the living room watching some TV. I cooked twice that day, and each time, I made sure to prepare an extra plate of food for Uncle Nick. However, I never actually saw him come out of his bedroom upstairs. I eventually went up and knocked softly on his door to tell him I had made some food. I heard a low, grunting noise from the other side of the door, so I just assumed that was his way of acknowledging me. The weird thing is, I had never actually met his uncle before. For some reason, Keith didn't introduce us when he hired me for this little job. He told me that Uncle Nick was fully aware I'd be staying there, but it still felt a bit strange. But here is where things started to get a little bit weird. Since he never left his room to eat while I was down in the living room, I eventually went up to Keith's spare bedroom to get some sleep for the night. I left the door cracked open just a tiny bit so I could listen for him in case he needed help. After a while, I heard a door down the hall swing open. Suddenly, I heard these unsettlingly quick and heavy footsteps rushing down the hallway and down the stairs. Just seconds later, those same heavy steps came thudding back up the stairs and straight into his room. Then, the door slammed shut with a very loud bang. It was honestly a bit unnerving. It's hard to explain, but the sheer intensity of his footsteps made it feel like he was either trying to avoid me or was in a massive hurry for some reason. The next day was pretty much the same as the first one. I made 2 more meals and left the food on the kitchen counter for Uncle Nick both times. When I was laying out in the backyard again, I came back inside and saw that the plate was completely empty, so I guessed he was really just avoiding me on purpose. Hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss our next scary story. But then, something happened that made my skin crawl. I went back outside to tan a bit more, and for some reason, I felt the urge to look up at the window of the room where Nick was staying. There he was, just standing there, staring down at me through the glass. As soon as he noticed that I saw him, he quickly ducked down out of sight. I felt so uncomfortable after that I folded up my blanket and went straight back inside and up to the spare bedroom. I told myself it was okay because I only had 1 more night of this, and then I'd be back home. I made dinner that evening and left him another plate of food. As I walked up to the spare room, I noticed his bedroom door was wide open for the first time. I thought maybe he was finally becoming less shy and more comfortable with me being there. I went to brush my teeth and then went into my room for the rest of the night to give him his space. I was having a really rough time sleeping, though. I just wasn't tired at all. While I was lying there in the dark, I heard a short creaking sound coming from inside the room, even over the noise of the fan spinning next to me. I sat up and looked around, but I could still only see a little bit in the dark room. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. More specifically, I didn't see Uncle Nick anywhere. I was getting really paranoid, honestly. I kept wondering why I was becoming so creeped out by a man with dementia, but wait until you hear what happened next. I lay back down on my side, facing the wall next to the bed. I tried to ignore the little sounds I thought I was hearing in my head, but then I heard a very faint, low groan. I sat up and turned off the fan so I could listen better. In the sudden silence, I heard the sound of heavy breathing. I slowly turned my head to the far right side of the room near the desk, and there he was. Uncle Nick was sitting right there in the desk chair, which he had turned around to face me. I screamed in pure fear, and he suddenly lunged toward me, hissing, "Shh," while he covered my mouth tightly with his hand. Which part of this story surprised you most? Drop it in the comments and share this with a friend. In that terrifying moment, I honestly thought he was trying to kill me. I was certain he was trying to suffocate me right there in the dark. I panicked and used every bit of strength I had to shove him off of me. Then I bolted for the nearest bathroom. I scrambled inside and locked the door as fast as my shaking hands would allow. I stood there, frozen, listening as his heavy, frantic footsteps hurried back toward his own room. Then, I heard his door slam shut with a loud bang. My heart was thumping so hard against my ribs I thought it might actually burst. I immediately grabbed my phone and called Keith to tell him everything that had happened. But here's the really unsettling part. He didn't even seem shocked by the news. If you're enjoying this story so far, smash that like button for me. Keith just calmly told me that it would be best if I just stayed in the bathroom with the door locked for the rest of the night. When he said that, it finally hit me. He knew his Uncle Nick was potentially dangerous. That realization scared me even more than the actual attack. I barely slept at all that night, maybe 3 hours at most, huddled on the cold, hard bathroom floor. As soon as the sun started to come up, I threw my things into my backpack and went to wait in the backyard for Keith to get home. When he finally arrived, he gave me some extra money for everything I had to deal with. I told him straight up that he needed to get his uncle some serious professional help. In my mind, this was way more than just a case of dementia, and I still have no clue what his true intentions were that night. But as crazy as that experience was, it's nothing compared to a true story my dad told me from when he was younger. Back in his 20s, my dad was still living with my grandparents, and they had neighbors in their 60s named Margie and her husband. One cold winter, Margie suddenly went missing. Her husband even came over and knocked on the door, looking completely frantic, asking my grandparents if they had seen her anywhere. But unfortunately, nobody had a single clue where she was. A few days later, my dad was hanging out at the park playing football with some of his friends. While they were playing, it started to snow really hard. They stayed out there for a while, but eventually the weather got too intense to keep playing. They all said their goodbyes and headed back to their own homes. When my dad walked through the front door, he realized his parents weren't home yet. He decided to start a fire in the fireplace to take the chill off. Then he went to his bedroom, which was right next to the living room, to toss his gear on the bed. After that, he headed into the bathroom to take a long, warm shower to thaw out. Now, this is where things take a very dark turn. Just as he was stepping out of the shower, he heard a strange humming sound coming from the living room. He opened the bathroom door just a tiny crack, still wrapped in his towel, and called out, "Mom?" The humming stopped immediately, but he could still hear the sound of wood creaking. My dad quickly pulled on his clothes and walked out into the main room to see what was going on. There, sitting right in my grandpa's old rocking chair, was Margie from next door. She looked directly at my dad and whispered, "It was so cold. I needed to get warm." My dad didn't hesitate. He ran straight next door to get her husband. But when the two of them came back into the living room just a minute later, the rocking chair was empty. Margie was gone. They searched the entire house from top to bottom, calling her name, but she was nowhere to be found. If you want to hear more stories like this, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next upload. If you think that's creepy, wait until you hear what they found the next day. They found Margie's dead body in the neighbor's crawl space. It turns out she had tripped and cut her head open on a sharp object, and she died right there. The husband only discovered her because the smell had become so bad that he could notice it all the way from the garage. But here is the most terrifying part of the whole thing. The medical examiner determined that she had been dead for at least 3 days. Yet my dad had seen her sitting in that chair, talking to him just the day before. To this day, my dad truly believes he saw Margie's ghost in that living room, and he isn't the kind of person who makes up tall tales. When he first told me this story when I was only 9 years old, let's just say I didn't get much sleep that night either. Which part of that story surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. On a completely different note, there has been a lot of Black Lives Matter protesting going on in my area lately. Before I get into the next part of the story, I want to be clear that I fully support the Black Lives Matter movement. However, I also feel that the looting and rioting are just not okay, and anyone participating in those acts really shouldn't be associated with the peaceful protesters. But unfortunately, mixed in with those peaceful people were looters and rioters hiding in plain sight. A few nights before this happened, many stores and houses in the town right next to mine were broken into and robbed, and a lot of car windows were smashed. We heard rumors from the police and our own friend group that our town would be the target the very next night. We stayed up a little later than usual for that exact reason. If you've ever felt that kind of neighborhood tension, drop a comment and let me know. While we were watching a movie together as a family, we suddenly had to mute the TV because we heard loud yells coming from outside. We checked out the window and saw a large group of young men with masks on parading down the street. They weren't holding any protest signs or anything like that. They were just being incredibly loud and, from the sound of it, they were cursing a lot. However, they didn't appear to be damaging any property yet, so we eventually went back to our movie. After it ended, my parents went to sleep. I stayed up later in my room, playing a video game with my headset on so I could talk to my friends. But here is where things start to get really strange. Eventually, I grew bored and tired, so I turned the system off and went downstairs to get a glass of water before bed. As I passed the little half stairway that leads to our den on my way to the kitchen, I looked down there and saw something big sitting on the carpet right by the window. I went down the stairs, and when I picked it up, I realized exactly what it was. It was the glass from the window. It was broken, but it was all taped up, almost as if someone did it to make the glass shattering easier or quieter. I ran to my parents' room to get my dad immediately. Before I tell you what the police found, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next part of this story. When my dad saw the window, he called the police right away. The response time was outrageously long. My dad said we were lucky the line wasn't even busy, since 911 calls in our area had been skyrocketing lately. When the police finally came to search the house, it didn't seem like anything had been stolen or that anyone was still inside. They actually had to leave to respond to another call within 20 minutes, but they told us to call back if something else happened. My dad and I decided to sleep in the den for the rest of the night to prevent anything else from happening, so my mom went back upstairs to bed. Time rolled on slowly, and eventually I think my dad fell asleep. Now, this is where it gets interesting. A large gust of wind suddenly hit me right in the face through the opening where the glass used to be, causing me to open my eyes and look at the window. No one was out there, but for some reason, I thought I heard a noise coming from upstairs. I went up the half flight of stairs thinking maybe it was just my mom. When I got to the kitchen, I continued to hear noises coming from directly above me. What else was above me? The attic. I went to the upstairs storage room, which had the attic door. I quietly opened it, revealing the short stairway leading up. This is when the noises stopped. I didn't flick the light switch on. I just tiptoed halfway up the stairs to listen. The heavy silence was terrifying, considering I knew I was hearing noises from up here just a second ago. I waited on one of the middle steps to hear something. Then I felt the hairs on my head being moved. Someone's fingers started running through the curls in my hair as I heard this deep, short, cackling sound. I let out a cry for help from my dad as all the confidence left my body and I was overcome with horror. I ran out from the attic to meet my dad halfway down at the kitchen, but he didn't go up to the attic. Dad grabbed his phone and called the police again instead of going up, while we stood there listening to heavy shuffling and thumps coming from right above us. When the cops arrived, they headed into the attic with their guns drawn and actually found someone. They came back down with a creepy old man wearing a mask who just stared at my family and laughed as he was led away. If you're enjoying this story, hit subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss our next one. Now, here's where it gets really weird. When the police asked what he was planning, he didn't even try to hide it. He admitted he saw looting on the news and just wanted to join in on the fun. He picked our attic because he said that's where we kept our valuables. Based on how he acted, you could tell he was totally insane. He told the cops he was alone and answered every question easily, but the guy clearly had some screws loose or missing entirely. The feeling of him brushing his hand through my hair is something that will haunt me for the rest of my life. I'll never feel safe going into that attic ever again. Which part of this story surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. That night changed everything, and I'll never look at my own home the same way.